I've been asked to do a little how-to video on the Bassett-Lowke Mogul locomotive because, of course, you get these used on the used market and they don't come with instructions, not the original ones usually. Also, I have a PDF copy of the original instructions that somebody scanned, but I find that with my engine, following those instructions exactly isn't perfect. But I suspect that's because these machines get older and they wear and whatnot, and being individually handmade back in those days, they're probably each individually have idiosyncrasies. So I can tell you what works with my engine, and that's the basics, but the reality is that with your own engine, you might have to experiment a little bit, which is kind of fun, right? This locomotive runs with methylated spirits. So you undo this clip. I'm not going to take it out now because it's all seated really nicely, but inside here, there's a long wick, and here there's another wick. You fill this with methylated spirits. Don't go past the amount that you should, because if you do, the spirits will start to come out here and spill down. You light it up and whoop, you got a fire all underneath your track. I learned that from experience. If your locomotive is new to you, you can twist this gently. It might be stuck in there from age. You know, you can put some oil or WD-40 or something in there, let it sit. Anyway, twist it off to see the wick inside. How it works, this is the pilot wick. You light that, it soaks up the alcohol. You light this pilot wick, it heats this. As it heats this, it draws more alcohol up into the wick here. And then all of a sudden, whoop, the vapor up here lights. It's self-lighting. So you light that first, you wait. If you've done it properly, you wait a bit, not very long, and the whole thing will self-light. Now, take it off, have a look at the wicks. Mine were carbonized on the top. They wouldn't have wicked very well. My preferred wick method is 0000, I think it is, fine steel wool. And with wicks, of course, you have to fiddle with them more often than you would with a butane burner. Every now and then I check the wicks or replace them. But for me, the maintenance was part of the fun. When running these engines, the safest, best thing to do for safety equipment, take a towel, soak it with water, put it in a little tub or a bucket beside you. If the locomotive spills and alcohol fire starts whooping up all around the engine, as it did, as I just described with my mistake, you literally calmly put the wet towel over the engine, the whole thing goes out instantly. If you don't, the fire will get hot enough to melt some of the soldering. I bring a little jar like this out with me. This is full of methylated spirits, and I fill it with this, easy peasy. This is the stuff I'm talking about. People refer to it as meths in England, methylated spirits, wood alcohol, but really it's methyl hydrate. I get it here in Canada at a store called Canadian Tire for like really cheap. So what to put in the boiler? Well, don't use your tap water, even if you live in an area where it's soft water, because, you know, there'll be other chemicals in there. There's chlorine often. Sometimes there might be fluoride. There's going to be some amount of minerals. If you live in an area with hard water, don't put that in your boiler. Boilers are copper and, things like that, and it will scale it. Also, do not use deionized water. Deionized water often will react in some ways by drawing out molecules out of the copper. You don't want to do that either. You want distilled water. You can buy it in grocery stores or pharmacies often, but something's even better if you can have access to it. This is a dehumidifier. Well, guess what? You're taking water from the air. It is pure water. There's no mineral in it. There's no chlorine. There's none of that. So I keep this thing, dehumidified water for steam locomotive use only. You don't want to screw around with the safety of your locomotive. You want to make sure the boiler pressure is proper. I spent very little money from a guy in England, brilliant, sells them on eBay and whatnot. Just Google for this type of locomotive, the safety valve water fill plug, and get a new one. Do yourself a favor. The old one on this probably released pressure off at half the pressure the locomotive's made for. As a real steam engine, of course, you have to oil it. Now, I just use light, regular machine oil or medium machine oil, and I routinely oil the various bearings and moving bits. That's smart, but of course you cannot use that as steam oil. This is steam oil. This is AccuCraft steam oil, which I've got different steam oil here. I've got a lighter weight steam oil and this AccuCraft stuff. This Locomotive runs, for me, better on this heavier weight oil. Your experience could be different. It's goopy because there's some petroleum product in it, but most of it is rendered animal fat. And it's designed to emulsify, mix in with the steam. And here is the lubricator. The reason why I think this Locomotive is very early production, if not the first years, it has one plug. You will note that these locomotives have two plugs. And the original instructions say, take the two plugs out, fill it until oil starts to come out the other plug. Well, this only has one plug. Very early production. Very, very early, probably the first year. This mixes in with the steam, and ergo, the lubricated steam lubricate the cylinders. And because this locomotive is a low pressure locomotive, there's no glands in here, there's no seal. What you want is a good steam oil. The steam oil not only will lubricate this, but when it's mixed with the steam, it's going to help seal that as well and give you a better run. I forced on over the end a silicone hose. I can push this in a certain way and it'll poke down, you know what I mean? It's perfect. This is how I load this up. In terms of the volume of the liquids for the engine, the original old antique instructions suggest 8 milliliters of oil, which is a teensy bit less than 1/3 of a fluid ounce. However, my engine runs better on 6 milliliters of oil. I find with 6, it wastes less oil at the beginning from spitting it out and stuff, and tends to start off initially when it's cold a little better, with a little less fuss. So instead of using 8 milliliters of oil, I use 6. Of course, that's me and my particular engine, which is old and worn, and I'm using AccuCraft steam oil, so you might have a different experience. Of course, you have to experiment and find out what works best for your particular engine. In terms of water, the instructions suggest 150 milliliters, which is 5 fluid ounces. I find that a little bit too much. It doesn't leave a whole lot of headspace above the water in the boiler for steam to expand. Not only that, it primes the steam pipe. And by that, what I mean is every now and then some of that water will get up into the steam pipe, which is at the top of the inside of your boiler. And that's the steam, that's where it gathers steam to go down to the cylinders. And priming it means some of the water is going to splash in there, causes a bit of cylinder lock, it spits out a bunch, a little harder to get going. My engine works way better on 120 milliliters of water, which is 4 fluid ounces. Now the fuel, the instructions suggest 30 milliliters, which is 1 ounce. However, I find with my particular engine that can cause it sometimes to leak out the bottom of the wicks. So to avoid that, I put 25 milliliters in, which of course is a little bit less than a fluid ounce. Now, the most important thing, never, 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 never allow your engine to run dry. Never have a situation where the water runs out while the alcohol fuel is still burning. You can destroy your engine that way. I find that with 25 or 30 milliliters of methylated spirits, when I put 120 milliliters of water in, there's still water left over after the alcohol is finished burning. These engines are designed to burn off the alcohol before the boiler empties of water. I got a used spare. This was a Great Western Lionel tender. Yeah, Great Western, I know, and this is LNER. But, the Locomotive isn't fine scale anyway, and it's meant to be fun, but it does have the coupler. If your engine is new to you, I would suggest hot water. It can be tap water for this purpose. Hot water, vinegar, put some in there, shake the Locomotive around. Shake it around, dump it out, repeat. I would clean out everything if possible. You can also force all of that mixture through all the piping. So here's what you do. You put your engine in forward or reverse. Depending on where you roll the wheels, you see the water is coming through the system and out through the blast pipe. Go the other way, it comes out of the boiler. Every now and then I do this. This is also how I empty things at the end of a run. You want to get your oil out of there at the end of a run? See what I'm doing? I've got the plug in here now. Plug's put back. Shame to waste this good oil that I've got in there, but I just wanted to show you. You can see the little pilot through that hole. You can see just the top of the wick. Yep, so you light through that hole. I bought these bamboo sort of food skewer things at a supermarket, a bundle of them for dirt cheap. Take a lighter, I light the end. Nice and easy, boom, done. If it's a little breezy outside, I use this, which I made instead of a steel wire, and which I have a fixed alligator clip and some wick. I dip that in the methylated spirits and light it. And then I just literally just doop, right there. That's all it takes. Pilot's lit. When screwing these back in, the various plugs, only need to do it finger tight, just finger tight. Seal, let the seal do the work. Don't wrench on it, you'll have a hard time later, especially when the metal is heated up and everything's cinched together nice and tight. Also, you don't want to wreck your seal. The pilot's lit in there, but you know, given that it's, you can just see a bit of a glow, but, whoop. I just heard the rest of the burner go pop. I can hear it. I can feel the heat. Problem is, it's alcohol burning on a bright day. You can't see it. Just keep your throttle closed in the center position while you're building up pressure. And I've got my wet towel ready. Normally on this spot, the footprint's such that I put my large G-scale train station on there for when I'm running my G-scale. Today, the stand-in is going to be this sort of Christmas decoration. I have a kettle, a little tiny, you know, inexpensive kettle that I use indoors, and I boil the distilled water before I put it in, because otherwise you're going to use a tank of gas just to get it up to pressure almost, you know. You can see that it doesn't have glands, and so when it's at pressure, you can see the steam and the water leak out in the oil. That's normal. These old machines are a lot of work, but they're also quite messy. Steam engines are dirty. Now I let the oil sit in there for a while just to get, so you can see what will happen. Normally, put the oil in, start it up as soon as possible, because otherwise some of it's going to seep down into there. But what will happen is, as you can see, it's going to spit. That's normal. I let it sit. This is what happens. This is why you should always, at the end of the run, let the oil out. You know, take out any excess at the end of the run. Now I'm going to stop that and wipe that off. No matter what, at the beginning of the run, there's always going to be some water that condenses in the pipes. Even the steam, the first steam that comes through, the pipes and the cylinders are cold, and there's going to be water that condenses in there, right? It's going to spit. So that's normal. Mine operates well. I've done a lot of work on it. I can have some control of the speed with the knob, so it's not turned all the way up. Of course, on this tight curves, I don't want to turn it all the way up. So of course, that's also your reverse knob, and mine gets loose. Used to get loose in here quite a lot. These would come quite loose, so I put a little bit of Loctite on there. So the train does need to stop at the station. So, you know, we stop and the passengers do their thing, and get on and off, and, you know, away you go again. All right, so I've done a number of runs, but it's time to go have some lunch. Yeah, so there's almost no pressure now anyway, because I let it run itself down after the alcohol tank was empty. So the engine has cooled a little. It's still hot. Right at the end of the run, if I were to grab hold of that, you know, here, hot, super hot. I mean, it's a real engine. I'm going to go around and I'm going to just wipe down the engine, wipe off the excess oil. I'm not going to scrub it or clean it. Just going to wipe it off and leave it a little bit oily. It's not so bad. And that's it. But one thing I will suggest is I do tend to loosen this. I have that in there loose. At the end of the run, I leave it that way, and I leave this off, because As it cools, as everything cools, if there's any condensed water, especially if there's condensed oil and water in the pipe, a steam pipe, as this cools, if you leave that on there, it can tend to draw that stuff up because this will create a vacuum. You might have stuff back up into your boiler that you don't want there. I hope all this has been helpful. And if you have any questions, you can always comment and leave them there.